Duke Ellington was dying. Everyone knew it. The cancer had spread from his lungs to everywhere that mattered. The doctors had given him weeks, maybe days. He weighed less than 100 pounds, could barely walk without assistance, could barely breathe without pain. But on this night, March 1974, Duke Ellington had insisted on one last performance, one final appearance, on the Ed Sullivan Show. The show that had showcased him for decades. The stage where he'd introduced America to jazz, and Ed Sullivan, standing backstage watching Duke being helped to the piano, knew this wasn't just a performance. This was a goodbye. Duke was 75 years old, and he was vying to play until he couldn't anymore. Ed just didn't know if Duke would make it through the song, or if he'd have to watch his old friend die on that stage, in front of 30 million people. In 6 minutes, the cameras would roll, and Ed Sullivan was praying he'd have the strength to do what needed to be done. Duke was sitting at the grand piano now, his band behind him, his hands resting on the keys, but not playing yet, conserving energy. His breathing was labored, audible even from where Ed stood. The stage crew had put an oxygen tank just off stage. Duke's doctor was there too, had begged him not to do this, said his body couldn't handle it. Duke had smiled that gentle smile and said, "Then this is a good place for it to end." Ed had been there for that conversation, had tried to talk Duke out of it too. "We can tape it. You can rest between takes. We can make it easier." Duke had shaken his head. "Live. It has to be live. That's how music should be. In the moment. Real." So here they were, Duke dying at a piano, Ed watching from the wings, and a television audience about to witness something they didn't know they were witnessing, a legend's final performance. The stage manager started counting down, 60 seconds to air. Duke closed his eyes, gathering himself. His doctor moved closer, checking vitals one more time. Duke waved him away. "I'm fine. Let me play." Ed walked over, knelt beside the piano bench. "Duke, you don't have to do this. We can stop it right now." Duke opened his eyes, looked at Ed, and in that look, Ed saw everything. Pride, fear, determination, and peace. "Yes, I do, Ed. This is who I am. This is all I've ever been. If I can't play, what's the point?" To understand what Duke was feeling, you have to understand what music meant to him. It wasn't a career, it was life itself. Duke had been composing since he was 7 years old, had created a sound that defined an era, had taken jazz from speakeasies and made it art, had composed thousands of pieces, had played with everyone who mattered, had shaped American culture in ways that most people didn't even realize. And now, with cancer eating him alive, with every breath a struggle, with his body failing in every way, music was the only thing he had left, the only thing that still made sense, and he was going to play one last time. The cameras went live. Ed did his introduction. His voice was different tonight, softer, more reverent. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce a man who has given us more beauty than we deserved, a composer, a genius, a friend, Duke Ellington." The audience applauded, standing ovation before Duke even played a note. Duke acknowledged them with a slight nod. Then his hands found the keys, and he began to play sophisticated laid. The first notes were perfect, clear, that distinctive Duke Ellington sound that had filled concert halls and recording studios for half a century. But Ed could see what the audience couldn't. Duke was struggling. His breathing was getting worse. His shoulders were hunched forward, his face was contorting with pain. But his hands kept moving, kept finding the notes. The music was flawless, heartbreaking, like Duke was pouring everything he had left, everything he'd ever been, into these final minutes. 30 seconds into the song, Duke's breathing changed. got raspier, more desperate. His doctor took a step toward the stage. Ed held up his hand. "Stop, not yet." Duke would signal if he needed help. And Duke kept playing, the melody building, the band joining in. But Ed could see Duke's hands starting to shake, could see him leaning more heavily on the piano, could see the moment Duke's strength started to give out. 1 minute in, Duke stopped breathing normally, started gasping between phrases. His left hand slipped off the keys, hung limply at his side, but his right hand kept going, kept playing the melody. The audience was starting to notice something was wrong. The applause had stopped. People were leaning forward. The band members were looking at each other, at Duke's doctor, asking silently, "Should we stop?" And Duke, with his right hand still playing, shook his head. "Keep going." Ed Sullivan made a decision. He walked onto the stage. Didn't announce it. Didn't ask permission. Just walked out and stood behind Duke at the piano. The cameras caught it. The audience saw it, and Duke, feeling Ed's presence behind him, understood. Ed wasn't there to stop him. Ed was there to help him finish. Ed put his hands on Duke's shoulders, supporting him, literally holding him upright, and Duke, with Ed's strength behind him, brought his left hand back up to the keys, both hands playing now, the song building to its crescendo. The audience was crying, not from the beauty of the music, though it was beautiful, but from understanding what they were watching. A man playing his final song, a friend holding him up so he could finish it, a moment of grace happening in real time. Duke's breathing was almost gone now, each breath a fight. His hands were barely moving, but the notes were still there, still perfect. Still Duke. Ed leaned down, close to Duke's ear, and whispered, "You're magnificent. You've always been magnificent, and everyone knows it." Duke's hands hit the final chord, held it, let it resonate through the studio, and then they fell, dropped to his lap. Duke slumped backward, and Ed caught him, held him upright in the chair. Duke's head fell back against Ed's chest. His eyes were closed. His breathing was so shallow, it was almost imperceptible. The audience didn't know what to do. Applaud. Stay silent. Some did both. Ed looked at Duke's doctor. The man rushed on stage, started checking Duke's pulse, his breathing, and then he nodded to Ed. Duke was alive. Barely, but alive. Ed helped the doctor lift Duke from the piano bench. They carried him off stage. Duke's band stayed where they were, instruments held but silent. Not knowing what to do, the cameras stayed on the empty piano, on the bench where Duke had just been, on the keys that still seemed to vibrate with the last note he'd played. Ed Sullivan came back on stage. 2 minutes later, his composure was gone. His eyes were wet, and he said, to 30 million people, "Duke Ellington just gave us everything he had left. Everything. And I want you to remember this moment. Not because it was sad, but because it was perfect. That's what it looks like when someone gives their entire life to beauty, to art, to making the world better than they found it." Duke Ellington was rushed to the hospital. The doctors stabilized him. But everyone knew this was the end. Duke lived for 2 more months, never left the hospital, never played piano again. But he talked about that night, about finishing the song, about Ed holding him up. He told his son, "That was how I wanted to go, playing, being held by a friend, giving people one more moment of music. That's a good death." Ed Sullivan visited Duke in the hospital 3 times before Duke died. They didn't talk much. Duke was too weak, but Ed would sit beside the bed, hold Duke's hand, and sometimes Duke would tap out rhythms on Ed's palm, little melodies, things he heard in his head but couldn't play anymore, and Ed would nod, like he understood, like he could hear the music too. When Duke Ellington died on May 24, 1974, Ed Sullivan released a statement. It wasn't long, just 3 sentences. Duke Ellington was one of the greatest artists this country ever produced. He gave us beauty when we needed it most, and I was honored to stand beside him at the end. At Duke's funeral, Ed sat in the front row, and when they played a recording of that final performance of Sophisticated Lady from the Ed Sullivan Show, Ed closed his eyes, and everyone who was there said they could see it. Ed wasn't just listening, he was remembering the weight of Duke against him, the struggle for each note, the determination to finish, the grace of someone who knew they were dying and chose to create beauty anyway. That night in March 1974, with Duke Ellington dying at the piano and 30 million people watching, Ed Sullivan made a choice. He walked onto that stage. He put his hands on his friend's shoulders, and he held him up so Duke could finish what he'd started. Not because it was good television, not because it was good television, not because it would get ratings, but because Duke had asked for one thing: to play music until he couldn't anymore. And Ed wasn't going to let him do it alone. The cameras kept rolling. The song finished. But everyone who watched understood. They'd witnessed something more than a performance. They'd witnessed what love looks like when it's tested, what friendship looks like at the end, what it means to hold someone up, literally, physically, so they can have their moment of grace. And they'd watched Ed Sullivan prove that the most important thing you can do with power, with a platform, with the ability to reach millions, is to use it to honor the people who made the world beautiful. What would you have done in Ed's position? If this story moved you, consider subscribe. These moments deserve to be remembered.